Hey, folks. Welcome to the first episode of the Hall of Fame Road Trip with Billboard Chart Guy. We're on the Kirk Minahan Network. I want to thank Kirk for allowing me this opportunity to launch this podcast. The podcast is really going to focus on two of my favorite topics, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Baseball Hall of Fame. And from week to week, or however often I'm going to do this, we're going to switch topics. Today, we're going to focus on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And there's nobody better right now, in my mind, to speak on this topic than Joe Kwaczala, who hosts the Who Cares About the Rock Hall podcast. It's a weekly podcast. I learned about it just at the end of last year, and I'm totally sucked in. It's in my weekly rotation. Joe, thank you for joining me on my debut episode.
Happy to be here, and thank you so much for the kind words about the show.
Yeah. So I know the show's been on for about 4 years. You and Kristen have been hosting it the whole time.
Yeah, that was the initial premise, was to get, my thoughts about the Rock Hall out and have somebody who could come in with much less intensity as kind of an audience surrogate. So, that's how it started. And, it's funny now that we've been doing it for 4 years. She is as much of an expert as anybody else out there, just through osmosis.
Right. Well, listen, for everyone who's listening, it's a great listen. This time of year, as all music fans know, is Hall of Fame time. So the nominations occurred in January. We've had a little controversy recently, which we'll touch on towards the end of the show. And the finalists will be named. The nominees will be named in May, I believe.
Likely
Correct.
Early May. Yeah, the ballots are due at the very end of April.
Okay, great. So, Joe, I wanted to have you on and kind of run through a couple of issues. Some are my own issues,
sure.
and others are just general topics.
Yeah.
The first thing I wanted to kind of run by you is I have 3 snubs that I just cannot live with.
Okay.
The folks that are not in the Hall of Fame, and I just wanted to get your feedback. And then I also, as a little bit of a twist at the end, wanted you to put a percentage on what you think their chances are to be inducted within the next 5 years. So we got three artists.
Great. Perfect.
So the first one is Bernie Taupin. Bernie Taupin co-wrote all of Elton John's great hits in the 70s. I mean, there is a long list of songwriters in the Hall of Fame. Holland, Dozier Holland, Gamble and Huff, obviously Carole King and Jerry Goffin, among a few. What has happened over the years with Bernie Taupin, and why seemingly is he not even considered?
Yeah, when Elton was inducted, he more or less said, "This is Bernie." So, the one person in my career who I owe this all to is Bernie. I think the reason why maybe he has not been considered is that all the songwriters you had mentioned wrote for a number of artists, so their impact was a little more spread out, and I think that's likely a stronger case when you have Holland, Dozier Holland, who wrote for all the Motown acts, and many legendary ones. But with Bernie, it's the partnership with Elton. And I think that, I don't know if it's going to be if Elton stands up and tells the Hall, induct Bernie. That's really what it's going to take. Because I'm trying to think if there's anybody who has been inducted as a songwriter and they only worked with one artist. And I don't, off the top of my head, I don't think there was.
I don't think so.
But, I mean, that would be cool. It's interesting what we see now is, and this is potentially just an exception, but when Pat Benatar was nominated this year and in 2020, included in the inductees for Pat Benatar, which you would assume would just be Pat Benatar, but Neil Giraldo, her husband and frequent collaborator, is included. So I think they are more open to that style of, I mean, that's, you could argue it's a slippery slope, but open to that type of induction. So I think the chances are low. I don't know that there's any mad rush to get Bernie in again, unless Elton makes a, like he did with Leon Russell, which I believe that's kind of off the books, but like, I think he showed up to the, some people at the Rock Hall and was like, please induct Leon Russell. And part of that deal is like, I will show up and give you the star power that you are looking for with these ceremonies.
And was the timing of that with Leon Russell when they did that album together?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So very much in the like marketing cycle, the PR cycle of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That they had an album, a collaboration album out.
All right. So you shot me down on that one.
I like the idea,
yeah.
but I get this sense that in the next 5 years, I would not bet on it. Do you want me to give a number? Is that what we're doing? Percentage?
Why not? Give me a percentage.
Okay. I will say 15.
Okay. All right. I'm going to jot you down. I'm going to get
not impossible. Like, I'm not impossible, but
right.
And I'm trying to think how often they induct songwriters at all. It seems very sparingly, to be frank,
I wonder if he could slide into that musical excellence category, perhaps.
Potentially. Yeah. I mean, but also he is just I guess I don't know if he has production in his, but he seems like kind of a perfect non-performer category, just straight up,
Okay. Number 2. Now, I know you've been ranting. I'm going to say, and I mean this in the best sincere way.
I rant all the time. Yeah.
Ranting and raving about Kool and the Gang.
Yes.
Okay. So in the same ilk, I have been ranting for years about the Spinners.
Yeah.
Couple of stats to throw at you. I mean,
Please.
Earth, Wind and Fire is in. They have 7 top 10 hits. The OJs are in. They have 6 top 10 hits. The Spinners fit nicely into that category. If it was up to me, they'd be inducted alone just for Rubber Band Man. I mean, that song is epic.
It's a great one, but it's like you don't even have to do that argument because they have so many great songs.
Yeah.
Could it be I'm Falling in Love or the the Dionne Warwick collaboration Then Came You and
Games People Play.
Ooh, It's a Shame.
Right.
And then I'm trying to remember the big one. I'll Be There. Oh my God, how good is that song?
Oh, I'll Be Around.
I'll Be Around. That's it.
I'll
yeah.
Be around. Yep.
I'll Be Around.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So
yes, I mean, like
they've been nominated.
They have, but it's been a while. I don't think they've been on the ballot since maybe like 2016 or 2017. It's been a while since we've seen them on the ballot, which is too bad because they are so they're so great, and it feels like they're being forgotten a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think they're too big to miss. And, as we start to reimagine these side categories where it's like Kraftwerk or Gil Scott-Heron is getting in as early influence, it seems weird, but maybe that's where the Spinners will wind up. But like, I think you need to acknowledge them in some way. I'd like to see them back on the ballot.
Yeah, they were just terrific and a big part of the 70s and early 80s, R&B scene. Absolutely.
And it's funny if you look into the roots of the Spinners, those guys were around in the 50s.
That's right.
Like they go way back. And at some point there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement for the Spinners, and I think someone like Questlove, who's a Philly boy, I think he is going to ride for them and make sure that they get in at some point. So I would say the odds in the next 5 years, I want to say it. I'm going to give them a slight edge and say 55%.
I like it. I like it. All right.
I could really see it going either way. So it's in the middle, but I'm giving them the slight edge.
Okay. You give me hope on that one. So I appreciate that.
They're just like, it's, they're just like almost too big to like, how do you ignore them? Especially when they've been on the ballot.
Yeah. My last snub, and this is a bit of a tip of the cap to mom and dad. How is Frank Sinatra not an early influence? I mean, so Louis Armstrong's in.
Mm-hmm.
Miles Davis is in.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, you see those movie clips of Sinatra and those fans outside the Paramount Theater in 1947 with all those Bobby Soxers. To me, he was the first rock and roll star.
That's an interesting, yeah. I mean, because he is pre-rock, like he's before the rock era. This is how I have always kind of felt about Sinatra, and I think there's an argument for his induction as an early influence. But I've always just felt like, to me, he was what rock and roll was like decidedly not trying to do, like
Yep.
buttoned up for the adults in the room, very, not. I mean, there are things about Frank Sinatra that has edge, but like not that's not what you think of. There's like a smoothness to him. He's very cool, and I think that is rock and roll. But I feel like the sea change that we associate with rock and roll's dominance, the thing that's on the other side of that is Frank Sinatra and the crooners.
Right.
But the other thing I would say is that he hated rock and roll. Like, he was furious. He used to he was deeply involved in the beginning of Warner Brothers Records, and his label Reprise was kind of involved in that. And one of the things early on, and it's funny because Warner Brothers really became a huge label because of their association with Jimi Hendrix and a lot of, very important rock and roll artists. Sinatra's bottom line was like, no rock and roll. We are not going to have any rock and roll. And so I think because of his deep dislike of the term and the genre, we don't really need to. I don't think we need to do that, and I don't see it happening. But again, not unlike, there's been, you referenced it earlier, the genre question that comes up when, say, like Dolly Parton is nominated. There's a lot of conversations, and she was just such a giant, ubiquitous pop cultural force. So is Frank Sinatra. Just a big name. So you can make an argument. In my opinion, there's no real rush to do it. He's not around anymore.
Right.
He hated rock and roll. I'm going to put it, I will say 20.
All right. So a little better than Bernie.
Yeah, just because of the name recognition and like how famous he is still, but still, right. I don't know that I see that happening.
Okay. Fair enough. I didn't think it would be high, but I just wanted to run it by you.
Sure. No,
every
I'm
now
glad
and then
you did.
I rant on Twitter about it, so it's just, moving to like this year's nominees, Lionel Richie. So my sense and my feeling of that is, and I'm kind of a person who wants things in order. Yes. And to me, the Commodores should be in before Lionel Richie. To me, there's no Lionel Richie without the Commodores. It's like putting John Lennon in before you put the Beatles in.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like, and also it's not a thing where like, because there are things like, if George Michael eventually gets in, that makes sense, and you don't need to put in Wham.
Agreed.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like there's certain things where like chronology wise, one would need to go in before the other, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to, like, the Commodores, one, are just way more rock and roll than Lionel to me. They have a definite edge. There is like a sexy danger quality to their music. And, it's just so funky, and had big hits, and were very significant on the charts. And Lionel became like the biggest name in music there for a few years, and I think that's what it is. And he still has a lot of credibility, just as like he's an American Idol host, and like he has turned into like a beloved figure that we can all agree on. But I 100% agree with you. I think the Commodores. And the other thing is, I get the sense if Lionel gets inducted, the Commodores will kind of be forgotten. I think
Yeah.
it won't be a priority for the Hall because Lionel's in. We can move on to something else, et cetera, et cetera. And that sucks because there's a lot of those guys are still with us.
Right.
And, you know, if we inducted the Commodores first, Lionel would get in. And then if you want to put in Lionel solo, okay, sure, you can do that at some point and he'll get a second induction. But instead to just do him solo, he's the only one who gets it. And then all those other guys, should it happen, they'll have to wait. And who knows if they'll be around for that, if it ever gets to that. So that just kind of, it puts a bad taste in my mouth.
Right. And again, without the Commodore's success, Lionel Richie doesn't happen.
Yeah, you look at how that happened at the end of the Commodores run, and you know Lionel he's starting to do these ballads. He's doing 3 Times a Lady. He's doing Easy, and that is an on ramp, and that's really what allowed him to break out and be such a successful solo artist. It was almost preordained, whereas like those songs were so big, and he's at the center of them, that the solo career, it was like happening whether he wanted it or not.
Yeah. It's. Do you think, conspiracy theory or not? I mean, is there a possibility that the Hall kind of tapped Lionel on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we want to do something," and could he have said, just me and not the Commodores, or is that just?
Well, crazy? I don't think that's crazy. I get the sense that didn't happen, but I think it could have. I don't think that's wild. I think there is some degree of like, especially given that he was at the ceremony last year. And so like he has talked with people at the Hall, like that, those communication channels are open.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know where the Commodores have never reunited.
Right.
I don't think there's really any animosity there. But they've never reunited. It could have been a cool thing for them to do that.
But so in thinking about Lionel and the Commodores, I thought of the following 3 artists who was the lead singers of big bands, all who are in, but as solo artists, these 3 gentlemen are not in. Just wanted to get your sense of what do you think down the road of Sting, Phil Collins, and Don Henley.
Right. Those are 3 good ones. And Sting is the only one who's been on a ballot. He was on the ballot in 2015. It's weird. Like the thing about, I've like missed Sting. I don't know but like there was a time when like Sting, post Police was a really big deal. Yeah. And I remember, I'm kind of a list guy and have a pretty good memory for lists. And when VH1 did their 100 greatest artists in the late 90s, the Police came in at number 10, which is too high. Right. We were talking about the greatest artists of all time, and you put them at number 10. That's but then Sting solo was also on the list, which I don't see happening if you make that list now. And so there was just a time when and I think a certain type of critic really loved Sting, but I don't know what of his solo career has really stuck around kind of in the zeitgeist, or even just like what you hear on the radio. Maybe like occasionally you hear like, God, what's that song called? In the Fields of Gold.
Fields of Gold. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't get it. I think he was, I think people laud him for his experimental, my man's playing a lute quite a bit in his solo career. And so I think that there's a type of critic and maybe industry person who really likes Sting, but I don't know that it'll necessarily come back around. And I also think we're at a point where getting a guy in twice is not a good look at the moment.
Right.
I think that is why someone like Don Henley, who had a big solo career with like a lot of albums that were well decorated, did well at the Grammys, Building the Perfect Beast, and End of the Innocence was a big song. And, he has a lot of Boys of Summer. Like there's a lot of big solo hits that he has, but I don't see anyone being like Don Henley needs to get in. I would maybe put Phil Collins at the top of the list in terms of someone who might, just because his solo career was so gigantic. And we have held on to that style of 80s music in a way, like the totally rewind flashback lunch or whatever is still very much a thing and associated with the 80s. And I think the Phil Collins solo output is so connected to that. I've always felt about him in particular that the Phil Collins solo work doesn't sound that different from the Genesis era.
Well, yeah, well, there's a time when Genesis was putting out Duke and Abacab, and then Face Value came right beyond it, and then the Genesis album came, and it all kind of merges.
Overlaps. Yeah,
it overlaps. Yeah, and
which to me it feels like to acknowledge that it feels like we've acknowledged that period of Phil Collins' work with the Genesis induction, in the way that, like, say, Peter Gabriel is not. It's like not even close. Like, Peter Gabriel was around the early days of Genesis when they were extremely prog and experimental, and then he left and then did music that sounded very, very different, and is meaningful for a lot of people, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas the Phil Collins stuff happened kind of concurrently and doesn't sound that different from some of that Genesis work. But again, he was big. So I don't know. I think there would need to be some sort of cultural renaissance where, like, suddenly we love Phil Collins again for some reason, and he's doing the rounds, and it's like, why not get him in solo?
Yeah. And, this last tour with Genesis where, and I know he has health issues, but him just sitting on the stool singing, not playing the drums is, I don't know. It's a bad look. I don't know if that's the word. It's
certainly different. I did not see that, or I haven't seen any footage of that, so I can't speak to it. But God bless him. You know.
I guess so. Yeah. So Dolly Parton. I know you just did an emergency episode last week.
Had to. I mean, it was of like Rock Hall stories. It is really something that, like, in terms of breaking through to the mainstream audience and like being on the regular news and stuff, it was really interesting. And like almost nothing happens that necessitates us doing an emergency episode like that.
No. So and you guys covered it from top to bottom, and I encourage my listeners to go pop that episode in.
Thank you.
I did want to just ask you though, kind of, after the nomination and then her statement, where are we going to be in May? Do you think she's going to get voted in? What do you sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So where we are right now is she said she'd like to withdraw. The Hall says you can't do that. And then that's where we've left it. And so the ballots are out with her name on it. Many of those ballots, I mean, I don't know. I actually wouldn't say many, but a good amount of ballots have to have been returned before her statement, I would assume. And before her statement, I would have said she was an ultimate lock. Like, she was definitely getting in. I think people will be hesitant to vote for her now. And so it's left everybody in a position where we don't know exactly what's going to happen. If this is going to have a big, I guess, ultimately, I'd say she's probably still getting in.
This year.
That would this year. That would be my guess. But it's kind of a coin flip at this point. Okay. I think, I've been thinking about it a lot still, if you can believe it. But I kind of agree with the Hall that, what their role and their mission is to kind of tell a story of rock and roll and tell it the way that they want to tell it. And you can't do that. It's not as much, or at least it shouldn't, in theory, be about like who's going to come and participate.
Right.
That's not like, so, because if you did that, then suddenly you'd have this list and you'd be like, hey, why isn't David Bowie on this list? And then they go, well, he didn't want to participate. It's like, you can't do that. There are some artists that will get in and should get in because of the mission that you're trying to uphold. And whether or not they want to participate really should be secondary. It's nice, and it's good for the HBO broadcast, and it's good for the live ceremony, and it brings in not just eyes and attention, but money, which helps the Hall to continue. So that's always, something that they think about. But you can't let someone recuse themselves. it sets a bad precedent. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Best case scenario for the Hall, she gets in anyway, and she shows up, and then plays Jolene, and everybody loves it.
Right. 9 to 5. We close the show at 9 to 5.
Yeah, I can see
So,
it.
So my last question, Joe, and really appreciate your time. I was going to ask you, give me your lock solid one nominee who's going to be inducted in October.
Right. Yeah. And I if you had caught me a few months ago, I would have said Dolly,
Yeah.
And now I guess I'll have to say Eminem. I think Eminem is in the tradition of what we've seen in the last few years. Newly eligible hip hop artist who was massively successful and critically acclaimed. Just a huge superstar. Everybody knows, last year it was Jay-Z. 2020, it was Biggie. 2017, it was Tupac. That seems to be the trend. And so I don't see why Eminem would not fall in line with that. So, and the Hall would love Eminem to be there. So if they need to do the trickery behind the scenes, they need to do. Not saying they do that, but he showed up at the ceremony last year. Everything is really falling into place for Eminem to be a lock for the class of 2022.
Excellent. That's kind of been my sense from when we heard the nominees. So they, not only is it an induction, but it's also a television show, and they want people who are going to perform and turn up. And
Eminem's having a bit of a resurgence with being on the Super Bowl halftime show. So again, every little piece is falling into place.
Okay. All I need someday is a Squeeze documentary, and I'll get my and we can get Squeeze in. That's for another conversation.
Tempting.
Yes, very tempting. I want to thank you so much for joining me.
Of course.
Besides who cares about the Rock Hall, you want to give your social handles and anything else?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so people can follow me on Twitter at JoeK or Instagram at Joe Kwa. And you can watch my Comedy Central special on Paramount Plus. If you don't have Paramount Plus and legit you want to just DM me, I'll send you a link. I don't care.
Okay. I'm going to hit you up on that. That's great. And really appreciate the time this afternoon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, and congratulations on a new podcast.
Another podcast.
We needed one.
Okay. Thank you, Joe.
Of course.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So I wanted to thank Joe for jumping on today. I can't recommend that podcast enough to you. It's become part of my weekly podcasting listening. Thanks again to Kirk and the Kirk Minahan Network, Dave Cullinane for helping me behind the scenes here. And I look forward to producing some more of these shows for you in the future. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.